Good evening and welcome to the 12th webinar of Season 11 of the National Humanities Center's Humanities in Class webinar series. My name is Mike Williams. Of course, I'm the Vice President for Education Programs here at the NHC, and as always, I am truly honored to be here with you all this evening. I sincerely hope that your respective weeks have gone well. Again, thank you all for everyone at the National Humanities Center, my team, and my good friends and several colleagues who are here tonight, including our colleague, Leah. Hi, Leah. Thank you for joining us this evening. This evening, we are fortunate to have a good friend of education programs and someone who I hold in high regard as a scholar, as a historian, the educator, and also a father. Interesting enough, he and I had a great conversation earlier today about our about our children, and he's someone who I've had an opportunity to serve on councils with before, and he's someone I've been looking forward to just having us here. Before I get started, I'll let you all know that this evening, our speaker, Luis, he will be referring to slavevoyages.org as well as slaveryimages.org as well. And so I will drop those links in the chat for you if you like to open them up in a separate browser. Of course, the go-to platform doesn't necessarily redirect out. So we're going to share those links with you if you're familiar with them. Again, slavevoyages.org as well as slaveimages.org. We'll go ahead and jump right on in. All right. The National Humanities Center is located in Durham, North Carolina, and for 48 years, we've supported the best in humanities scholarship and humanities education. We are the only private nonprofit institution devoted exclusively to the study of the humanities. Here at the center, our education program serves as that nexus and important connection between our scholars and our educators. Our goal is to consistently build the bridges between the scholarly world and your classroom, wherever you may be. We support educators at all levels. However, a large majority are at the K-12 level, I would say secondary. But we do have collegiate and graduate level educators as well. I'm joined by an outstanding team that's passionate about this work and who are committed to ensuring that our programming meets the needs of all of our teachers. And I'll take a few moments to update you all on some of the recent happenings here at the center. And to hear more about what's going on or to find out additional information about all that's happening at the National Humanities Center, I encourage you to go to nationalhumanities.center.org. From left to right, you'll see featured research, forming and transforming communities, highlighting the research of our 25-26 fellows class whose projects examines the ways communities created through proximity or shared experience are formed and transformed in response to crisis. In the center panel, held recently at the World War I Museum in conversation, How to Disagree Agreeably, this event brought together the progressive Dr. Cornel West and conservative Robert George, who are in fact good friends and are united by their interest in great thinkers from the past and by their commitment to lively, respectful debate for a conversation on the questions that matter most. If you're interested in checking out that conversation, you can go to the World War I Museum YouTube page to find out additional details. In the third panel, in partnership with humanists and humanities organizations across the country, the National Humanities Center will stage Being Human US from April 18th to May 2nd, 2026. This features a range of public humanities events. This initiative will support the development of programming for diverse, non-academic audiences across geographic regions and subject areas. The 2026 Teaching African American Studies Summer Institute, Teaching the Digital Diaspora, will be hosted on the historic campus of Prairie View A&M University, which is just west of Houston, Texas, this summer. I will be joined by an outstanding group of passionate interdisciplinary educators from all over the country from June 15th to June June 20th, and which coincides with the celebration of the Juneteenth holiday, which we intend to participate in the celebration down in Galveston, Texas as well. So teaching the digital diaspora will move beyond traditional resources to explore how digital humanities can illuminate the complexities of the African diaspora. Participants will work with scholars to understand how these tools reveal hidden histories of resistance, self-determination, and artistic contributions across vast geographies and time periods. The application window is now open. If you're interested in joining us, please consider applying by March 30th. All of the work that I'm describing is informed by our Teacher Advisory Council, our strong and our talented Teacher Advisory Council. We have a team of educators across the country who are giving us feedback and consult with us on various projects. Our 25-26 council began their service year August 1st, and we are working with them throughout this year. That term of service will actually end July 31st. Announcements will be forthcoming for our 26-27 council if you are interested in joining us. If you or your colleagues are interested in checking out recordings of past webinars, please navigate to our webinars landing page and follow the webinar archives links to our dedicated YouTube page, where you will find past recordings. And I announce this every time I'm online, but please note that viewings of past recordings, unfortunately, are not eligible for CEU and or professional development hours certification. You have to be here live in this session to receive those precious professional development hours from us, at least the certification thereof. All right, as a housekeeping matter, I just want to let you all know that, of course, tonight's webinar is audio and PowerPoint based. So you will not see our speaker directly, but you will be able to interact with both of us through the chat box. There are two primary chat boxes. One is the audience chat, where you all are doing a great job interacting among each other right now. But the other is the Q&A chat. And so if you have any questions this evening for our speaker, I'll be monitoring those questions and bringing them to his attention throughout the presentation. Thank you for joining us this evening. You are now attending the webinar entitled Slavery and Resistance in the Atlantic World. Our leader for this session is Luis Martinez-Fernandez, the Pegasus Professor of History at the University of Central Florida. We also have members of our Teacher Advisory Council, David Beller and Jamie Wilson, who are, again, current members of our Teacher Advisory Council, but they will serve as our TA for tonight's session, TAs. They will be active in the chat, sharing thoughts and resources and asking questions. Again, thank you all. Thank you both so much for your service to the Council, as well as your willingness to join us this evening. Dr. Luis Martinez-Fernandez is a historian, university professor, author, and public speaker, whose fields of expertise include Latin America, the Caribbean, education, and Latino and Hispanic politics, culture, and society. Born in Havana, Cuba, and raised in Lima, Peru, and San Juan, Puerto Rico, he holds BA and MA degrees in history from the University of Puerto Rico and a PhD in history from Duke University. He is recognized as one of the most prolific and influential scholars in the field of Caribbean studies. His publications include articles in Cuban studies, slavery and abolition, Latin American Research Review, the Americas, Caribbean Studies, History Today, and in numerous anthologies and edited volumes. His books include Fighting Slavery in the Caribbean, Revolutionary Cuba, a history widely acclaimed as the most comprehensive and systematic study on the subject ever written, and a key to the New World, a history of early colonial Cuba. A winner of the 2018 Florida Book Awards, Bronze Medal for Nonfiction, Martinez-Fernandez serves as a trustee of the College Board and in numerous professional, editorial, and community boards, among them the Cuban Studies Journal, the South Atlantic Humanities Center, the Community Advisory Board of WMFE, and the Executive Committee of the Board of Directors of the Historical Society of Central Florida. In 2005, he founded the annual Latin American Cultural Festival of Orlando. In March of 2019, he joined the Board of Directors of the National Council for History Education and assumed the role of Board Secretary. As I said before, Luis is a very, very good friend of our programs who we always just enjoy engaging with. Dr. Luis Martinez-Fernandez, it is an honor to have you here tonight, and we are looking forward to your talk. And we're going to wait for a moment while Luis connects to ensure that there aren't any technical difficulties. So again, thank you all for joining us this evening. And I see a few remarks there for people who arrived just a little bit late. Well, the talk is going to start here shortly, and so please hang tight, and we're going to jump right on in. Again, everyone, we are in fact here. I put a little note in the chat because we're working on Luis's audio right now, getting him connected, but we are in fact here, and we will start shortly. So please know that we're still here. I see your messages, and I will engage with you in the chat as we are remedying his sound.
I'm sorry?
Okay. All right. We are all set. Luis, we can hear you loud and clear now. Our little back channel worked, i.e. mobile devices and a phone call. So, Luis, thank you so much for joining us. We are so looking forward to your talk, and feel free to go ahead and get started, my friend.
Thank you, Mike. I'm honored by this invitation. I appreciate what you and the center does for engaging teachers and supporting them, and I'm very happy to be part of this series. My gratitude also goes to the teachers who have joined us. From your busy schedules, you've made time to work with us today, and we know that this for the benefit of the students, and that's what we're here for. One of my favorite things, and Mike Williams knows this, is to work with teachers. If it wasn't for the good teachers that I had, actually the great teachers that I had, I don't know what would have been of me. But I'm thankful, and I usually, when I have a chance to talk with teachers, I tell them, you are the first responders, against ignorance, and I really value what you do. So today I have less than an hour, and there's so much that we could talk about. The topic of slavery, the topic of resistance. There is so much information, so many materials, so many angles and perspectives. And today we're going to just be able to scratch the surface regarding these. This presentation will include various materials that I have shared with the center, and they have been made available to you. Some of these are illustrations. You know that so many of our students learn visually, and there are plenty of materials available in the internet. Primary documents. We are so fortunate that we can access so many firsthand accounts of the enslaved and those who participated in the slave trade. Primary documents, web pages, and some modules that I will be also sharing with you. So, slavery and resistance in the Atlantic world. These are some of the topics that I'll be spending time on today. A little bit on historiography. That is a very important term, and I don't think it's ever too early to teach students what historiography is. And I'll spend just a few minutes on that subject. Of course, we have to start in Africa, and we even have to go further back to antiquity, different concepts of what slavery is and how they changed over time. The topic of the slave trade, we will be engaging later in some hands-on activities when we visit a web page that you should have access to. It's called slavevoyages.org. We'll play a little bit with that. Number 4, the sugar revolution. And that's a topic that, for those of us who study the Caribbean, is so important because we have these two pillars that transform the Caribbean. On the one hand, the pillar of sugar, and on the other hand, the pillar of slavery. They go hand in hand, and we'll spend some time talking also about slavery and the law. Very different traditions. On the one hand, the Spanish legal tradition, we'll spend some time on that. And on the other hand, the common law tradition that was in place in the British colonies and certainly in what later became the United States. Roads to freedom. It's a topic that is of much interest. The many ways in which the enslaved sought freedom, whether it was individually or collectively, whether it was by force or in a covert fashion. The topic of syncretism is one that is very, very important to me as a scholar. I was sharing with my students the other day that, I turned 66 a couple of weeks ago, but I still have that same energy and that passion for discovery that I had when I was a starting graduate student in my 20s. And my current project takes me away from Cuba and Puerto Rico, and I've been working on the island of Martinique, and then some closing words on the legacy of slavery. A few words on historiography. As you know, the word history has two meanings. We refer to lowercase history as the events, the human events, what unfolds over time. And then we have the other definition of history, which sometimes we refer to as capital H history, and that is the study of those happenings, the writing about those happenings. And sometimes when I talk to my students, I tell them, well, and kind of in a tongue-in-cheek way, who writes history with lowercase? Things like, well, it's soldiers in the battlefields or workers in factories. And then who does the other history with capital H? And that is historians. We sit at our desks. And then introducing that very important concept of historiography is, if capital H history is the study of lower h history, then historiography is the study of capital H history. I don't have much to say about that, but I have here a few titles of books that are part of those debates, right? When we know that history, written history, is not just what happened, but it is how people have investigated what happened, the conclusions that have reached, the methods that they have used, the sources that they have used, and therefore history is, as all of you know, an evolving discipline. So let's start with Africa, and that's where the story starts. This is a very early map of Africa. One of the things that I love doing in my teaching is to use maps of old maps and even ancient maps. And we're so fortunate that we can access these maps just by looking in the internet, trying to find these databases of maps. So slavery is an ancient institution. It goes as far back as antiquity, and many of you already know that where we get the word slavery, right? It's from Slavs, Eastern Europeans, who were enslaved by the Romans. And it was, of course, a very different type of slavery than the one that we will be spending most of the day, most of tonight talking about, which is the modern slavery that really began in earnest in the Caribbean and then in other parts of the Atlantic. So we have the medieval conception of slavery, particularly in Spain. We will spend some time talking about las siete partidas, or the 7 parts, which was the body of legislation in medieval Spain. And interestingly, they viewed slaves or the condition of slavery as something to be avoided, something negative, something that is not humane, something that if people have a chance, they will be able to escape it. And again, back to Africa. I'd love to one day go to El Maina Fort in Ghana. It is where one of these main ports of exports of slaves. Slaves that came to North America and the rest of the New World, of course, came from very different places along the west coast of Africa, but also in some instances from the east. And most of the largest number of slaves who were brought to the United States, to what became the United States, were from Ghana. And that's why that fort has very important significance. Okay. The Atlantic slave trade. It's a very complex subject, so many nations involved, how it changed over time, the notions about the conditions in the slave ships. One thing that I would like to do, if we can do it now, is to jump to slavevoyages.org. Are you able to connect to that page?
And I'll let everyone know that I've dropped the link in the chat. Again, I will continue to drop it because I realize that chat moves along pretty quickly. And so if you will consider opening that in another browser. Unfortunately, the go-to platform will not redirect and screen share. So we're asking that you open up that link. And so I'll continue to drop it there. Thank you all. And thank you for your responses.
Well, if possible, if we can spend just a few minutes looking through that page. Unfortunately, I cannot do it with you because of the limitations of this platform. But if you go to that page and then click Pi on the right hand margin, you will see a number of options. So if you click Pi, what happens? I'm not sure if I'm getting feedback from the audience.
Yeah, you will see the responses populate in the chat. Initially, there's a little bit of a delay, but then once the responses come in, the chat tends to move pretty quickly. So, yeah, the responses are coming in now.
Okay. One says there's no Pi.
Yeah, and are you referring? And are you referring to the menu bar on the left?
Yes.
Yes. Yep. There should be a menu bar. If you navigate to slavevoyagers.org, there's a menu bar on the left of the page. And you will see options for the about, the intro maps, the essays, estimates, time lapse, as well as the 3D videos there.
Okay, this is something that I use with my students, and one of the most fascinating things for students, and you could do it almost at any level, really, even middle school, is to play the role of the historian, to be able to discover by engaging these databases and asking questions. For example, so if you click Pi, and then it gives you flag. And then if you change sector to principal port of disembarkation, what do you see? What happens? Mm-hmm. And then if you click on map, yeah, pie, P as in pie chart. Somebody says we are confused about pi. I can understand that.
Yeah, we encourage you all, when you go to the main page, you will see voyages. And when you select voyages, on the right side of the screen, you're going to see voyages, some stats, line, bar, but then you also have pi. As Luis mentioned, it gives you the option of selecting the pie chart on that page. So you're going to navigate to voyages first, and then you're going to select the 1, 2, 3, 4, the fifth block down on your right there. And I'll continue to respond to you all in the chat to guide you.
So are you able to change sector to principal ports of disembarkation? And once you do that, you can click on map. And now, and Mike, feel free to step in. Now you can click enslaved people. And you can go to percentage children. And this is the wonderful kind of information that allows your students to discover things such as what was the proportion of men versus women in these slave ships? How many were children? You can also find information about, and of course it's very sad, those who did not make it. So you can play with this, and I encourage you to, in your own time, to play with this and figure out what kinds of things you can get your students to discover. And it's not too hard to create modules based on this. I see Cosette saying that's a lot of data. Cosette, good visuals. Again, I apologize because I'm not being able to see it while I'm on this platform, but I hope that you're getting the idea of what can be done. Any comments? Any ideas from the audience?
And we'll encourage you to include your thoughts in the audience chat, or if you have a particular question about slavevoyages.org, you can enter it in the Q&A chat that we have as well. But I too will encourage you to spend some time in the sectors, under the sectors section. There's a pull down, and then you also have the values, which are located immediately under there. And I will tell you that I started using slavevoyages.org back in 2015 when I visited the UK and had a colleague to point it out to me. But this is an updated version of the site, and they're continually updating it. So yeah, as Luis mentioned, spend time on the site and continue to look at the numbers and the percentages, and have your students really reflect on and evaluate a lot of what they're seeing.
And again, it's so much fun to play historian. And let me go to the next slide. This is some of the examples of the visuals that you see when you select the major African exporting coastal regions. You can also divide this by periods of time, how it changed over time. And then before I go to the next one, what percentage would you guess of the slaves that were imported to the New World were imported to ports in the 13 colonies and then the United States? Just a guess. Of the roughly 11 million imports, what percentage or proportion arrived in the United States? Okay. I'm looking at the chat log. $30, $45, $70s, $25, 3%. Good. We're all over the place, and sometimes we think that the majority of the slaves were brought to North America, but the reality is that the largest recipient was Brazil, and here we see some. You see the sizes of the those circles showing which were the largest recipients. And we have along the coast of Brazil, the largest, then islands like Saint Domingue, Jamaica, Cuba. And if you can tell by the smaller size of the circles that those who arrived in North America were was a small proportion of those who came. Now, why do you suppose that we think that the United States and the 13 colonies received more than they actually did? Yeah, Brazil, yes, the largest. So those are examples of things that you can use in the classroom. And let me move to the next slide. Here we have some totals for different periods. Another fascinating source is Curtin's book. It's an old book from 1970 entitled The Atlantic Slave Trade, a Census. And here we see the information comparing what Curtin did in 1970 and then what the Transatlantic Slave Trade Database has done. And as you can imagine, the amount of work that has gone into this, some of the information that if you play with this for a while, you will see that that for some vessels, we have the entire list of passengers. We can find a particular vessel. We can find a particular slave captain. We can find the crew. Just wonderful information that we see here. Okay. Again, here we see the volume represented in another fashion. The variables, things that we can look for: name of vessel, date of departure, tonnage, number of Africans who died on board. And of course, what we see here are numbers and percentages and charts, but behind all of these numbers, there are actual human beings that had painful experiences, and some of them died in the process. And that's something that when we have these kinds of statistics, these kinds of numbers, we can also play with some of the actual narratives of the enslaved. We have, many different narratives, first-hand accounts. Okay, let's see what's next. This one's a little bit hard for me to see. This is a module that you can use in your classrooms. It is among the materials that have been made available to you. So feel free at your convenience to actually, my encouragement is create your own modules. Sugar Revolution. The Atlantic Slave Trade, a Census by Curtin, Curtin. I see a message from Tatiana. The concentration of current Southern Black population that may lead us to think that there were more people brought to the U.S. and not considering that those have moved here and the generations. You're absolutely right. We think about this. Right before the Civil War, the slave population in the United States was about 4 million. Yet, if we look at those who were imported, it's far less than 1 million. And for other countries, I'll take the example of Saint-Domingue, that later became Haiti. We have much larger imports, but the populations were less. And that has to do with the conditions of slavery. The populations in what became the United States were able to reproduce themselves, whereas those in places like Jamaica or Cuba were not able to reproduce themselves. A lot of it has to do with the material conditions. And Wanda, I'm sorry, you can't hear. Can it?
I'll enter a response in the chat. Sometimes if the permissions aren't enabled in their browser, sometimes they'll have difficulty with it. So audio may not be enabled in our browser, but I'll respond to that. We can continue on. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, these are some of my favorite books that have to do with the sugar revolution, the Cuban counterpoint. This book was originally published in, I think, 1940, and it's a beautifully written book that contrasts the two main products in the Cuban economy during the 19th century and actually even the previous century, which are tobacco and sugar. And what Fernando Ortiz does is that a little bit schematically, he says that everything that was good about Cuba came from tobacco, and everything that was destructive and ugly, including slavery, including the degradation of the environment, including violence, are all related to sugar. And then there's a book that I still use by Richard Dunn, Sugar and Slaves, in which he takes us by the hand through the sugar revolution. Now, let me explain what I mean by the sugar revolution. And I will use some examples of my current research. I started looking at the history of Martinique for my current project, which I'm very excited about. It has to do with the history of food during the Napoleonic era. And the working title is The Banquet of Waterloo. One of the chapters includes Martinique because there's a connection of Martinique with Napoleon. Josephine, Napoleon's first wife, was from Martinique, and we can't get good Cuban cigars here anymore. Audra, that may change soon, and I'll leave it at that. So when we look at Martinique, it started with Christopher Columbus during the second voyage, passed by the island of Martinique and didn't set foot there, but he claimed it for Spain. Then, during the fourth voyage, Columbus's vessels passed by and they let go or disembarked pigs as well as goats. They were not ready to colonize Martinique because there was so much going on in the rest of the New World that was unfolding. So the Spaniards claimed Martinique, but they didn't have the resources, and you can understand why. Why spend time and resources in a small island like Martinique when we have Central America and Mexico and South America and the gold and the silver bullion and all of that? So in the year 1636, they allowed the French to settle there. And the French who went there beginning in 1635 were, for the most part, the French word is engagé, and that is workers, contract workers that were sent there. They were their passage was paid, and then they had to work for a period of 7 years. And what they were doing at the time, these indentured servants, that's a word that we use in English, was that they were producing cotton, they were producing tobacco, they were producing some indigo, and they were also producing some food crops for the workers. Now, something important happens in 1654, and this is something that we also see happening in Barbados and other places. And in 1654, the Dutch are kicked out of Brazil. In Brazil, they developed sugar plantations. This is something that they developed the technology. They developed the shipping routes. They were very much in the vanguard of sugar production in Brazil. Now, at the time, sugar was a luxury, and it was considered almost like a spice. It was not commonly used. It was something that the elites were beginning to use. So when 1654 happens, the Dutch bring the factors that are needed for this sugar revolution. Number one, they bring slaves. They bring their own slaves from Brazil. They bring the machinery. They bring the know-how. They bring the global connections of trade. And the reason why we call this a revolution is because the world was turned upside down. What happens? Well, the slaves, which were just a tiny minority during the 1640s, within a matter of 3 or 4 decades, the African slaves, that population surpasses the population of the white indentured servants. So that's one way. The things that begin to happen, and remember that to produce sugar, it takes a lot of capital. You need to purchase the land. You need to purchase the slaves. You need to purchase advanced machinery. And I'll share with you one slide, the next slide, that shows you how that the complexity of the process. French West Indian sugar plantation around 1660. So I don't know if you can see, but there's a character, the characters towards the front, they're wearing Dutch hats. And we see that at the center, there is the mill. We see some animals that are the force that moves those mills. There's the cane needs to be introduced through those mills, and that produces two things. On the one hand, it produces bagasse, and bagasse is the refuse, the dry sugar cane that cannot be consumed, but it is used for energy. And then what is the other main product that we see happening, that we see coming out of this mill? Can anybody share that with us? So we press the sugarcane stalks. We get the refuse on the one hand, and what do we get on the other hand? It's sugarcane juice. That used to be one of my favorite drinks but unfortunately I can't have it anymore. My wife won't let me drink guarapo, which is sugarcane juice. And you see on the sides and the front that juice is placed in these large cauldrons. And these cauldrons are subjected to heat, and gradually, and this is just a fascinating process, which is very complicated, what we see is that those molasses, that sugarcane juice, becomes molasses. And the molasses is saturated with crystals. And the next step is to separate the molasses from the crystals. So what do you do with the crystals once you separate them? Well, that becomes, I see Barbara Campins Cambra, que divino guarapo, another person who likes guarapo just like me. Just don't have too much of it. It could be bad for your health. And what we do with the guarapo, with the molasses, is the production of rum. The next slide also has to do with the sugar revolution. This is a module that I put together several years ago, in which, and again, you have access to this, in which I explain the different components of sugar production. We see another plantation here. And then I want to bring your attention to this next slide, which is a primary document that is transcribed here, inventory of a plantation in Puerto Rico from 1570. If you can make that page big enough to read what it includes, then we can have maybe a little conversation about that. So let's take a couple of minutes to examine those two pages. Lorena Wu. So the school does not mention sugar, and that's a big problem there. Now you have the opportunity to introduce sugar as something that transformed the world. So let's take a look at these two pages, which is something that I share with my students. It's an inventory. So what do we have here? The headings of the documents are property, black males, black females, and house furnishings. Yes. Now, why do you suppose that we have this? Why do you suppose that this document with these categories has survived? What is the question? Yes. The question is, how come we have this document from over 500 years, from almost 500 years ago, that we can use and analyze and use in the classroom? It's an inventory. Would anybody like to guess why this document was created to begin with? It's an inventory, yes. I don't know this for a fact, but I believe that this document was done at the time of death of, somebody mentioned taxes, good, at the time of death of the owner. And it's also related to tax purposes. Very good. Now, when we look at this, let's focus on the male slaves. What kind of information do we have here? And what conclusions? Somebody mentions that it's a census, not quite, but it's a census for that particular plantation. So what are some of the conclusions that we can draw by the information that appears there? Good. Occupations. What kinds of occupations do we find? Not all of them have occupations. We have the names and skills. Very good. We have their ethnicity, right? Most of them were born in Africa, but some of them not. We can see one of the conclusions that we can draw is that the slaves in a small plantation, there are not that many here, but they come from many different backgrounds, many different ethnic backgrounds. And it was, there's a carpenter, boiler. Some of them are skilled. The ones that we don't see as skill, what can we assume they do in the plantation? They don't have a particular skill, so probably they're engaged just in cutting cane. Now, let's look together at the list for men and the list for women. What conclusion can we draw by looking at this? One slave is too many. I agree. General labor, very good. Field work. Do we see somebody here who's born in, are these, well, the ones that we see, the ethnicity, that's where they were born, the ethnic group that they belong to. But can we assume, or is there a way to tell that some of these slaves may have been born in Puerto Rico? Lani Barba, yes, there are far more men than women, and that's the way the planters wanted it. It's interesting that the crown did not, and the church did not want to see these differences in terms of gender imbalance. They wanted to have as many women as many men so that they could get married. We're going to talk about marriage in just a little bit later. Do we get information about race? There's one that says Creole, right? You see where it says Creole? And we have a lot of Creoles, particularly among women. And that means that they were born in Puerto Rico or somewhere else. That's the meaning of Creole. There's a mulatto, so we begin to see racial mixture. Another aspect that was associated with the sugar revolution, not only do we have slavery and the violence that comes with that, but we have very sharp distinctions between the planter elite on the one hand, and then on the other, the slaves. This is an example, still standing. You can go to Barbados and have a tour of those facilities of that plantation. This is a result of the capital accumulation of the master class. And then when we contrast with the next slide, and these are ubiquitous in Barbados, those are the chattel houses. They're still standing, and it's still, Creole is a language and a group of people. Yes, Creole can be used. We see the development of Creole languages, which bring together. Mike Williams, I visited the plantation. What a remarkable difference between the plantation and the chattel house communities. Now, I'll say, and Mike, probably you remember this, and I'll go back to that image of the plantation. There's a tour, and they tell you everything about sugar, but they're very silent about slavery. There is no indication that there was human suffering. There's no indication that it was enslaved people who built these types of palaces. There's no indication of that whatsoever in the tour, which is very sanitized. So you have to do your own homework, and when they're giving the tour, maybe ask questions. Okay, let's see what the.
And Luis, yes, that was my response. I entered into the chat, but yes, very much sanitized, which is somewhat difficult when you have a group of educators who are there specifically to discuss the legacies of the transatlantic slave trade, because they were inundated with questions, particularly the question about the armchair, which is located in the great house in the parlor, which drew a lot of attention as well.
Yes, we'll get to that one, which is sort of the closing slide, right? But yeah, they don't mention slavery. It's all about the rum. It's all about the families. It's all about, they have documentaries of the process, but there are no slaves. One of the things that I do in my classroom is I show them, and you can find this in the internet very easily just by Googling Nicholas Abbey Plantation and look for videos, and you can see that the video tour that they show has no mention of slavery. So I use that in the classroom, and I ask my students, well, what's missing here? And they all get it, of course. The next slide is and I just love putting these materials together. This is a lesson plan that was published in Social Education, a journal that I've published several lesson plans. Actually, I just created one that will be coming out in the next issue or so on the difference between history and historiography. But here, what I do is I bring up documents. And one of those documents is Las Siete Partidas, which translates to the 7 parts. And I'll read a little bit from that document. Servitude, again, this is the legislation in place pertaining to slaves and serfs. Servitude is the vilest and most contemptible thing that can exist among men. There's a recognition that slavery is bad, that we have it, but it's not a good thing. It's not a good thing for the slaves. It's not a good thing for the system, but it's a recognition. Now, the other documents that I include here, some of them are from slave codes in the United States and pertaining to marriage. Again, in the Spanish tradition, they favored marriage. But this is what I found in the tradition of common law, and I'm quoting, "The slave is not ranked among sentient beings." They're not even human beings. And I'm not making this up. That's the exact test. And then it says, "But among things, things do not get married." Again, I'm not making this up. This is the kind of logic that was in place in the antebellum. And if you check these materials, you'll be able to use them. Roads to freedom. Has anybody heard of Jacob Lawrence? Jacob Lawrence. Jacob Lawrence was a member of the Harlem Renaissance, and he was a painter. And one of the things that we know about the Harlem Renaissance was that Afro-American poets, painters were very much in connection with artists and painters from places like Haiti and Martinique. And Jacob Lawrence produced a wonderful series of paintings. These are on paper that pertain to the Great Migration of African Americans to the North. Just beautiful, beautiful works. You can see here, the slide that I have up, you can see some resemblance of what is called in Haiti primitive art, the colors, the types of characters. Jacob Lawrence series on the Great Migration, easy to use with students at all grade levels. Thank you very much. And Jamie Wilson has shared that link with us. So if you have a chance, look up those images, both for the Great Migration and also for the Haitian Revolution. Okay, roads to freedom. Manuel Victoria, Langston Hughes was also part of that time, definitely. Just incredible creativity during that period in places like, mostly in New York, Harlem, and other places as well. Okay. You will also have access to this reading, Roads to Freedom, which I use with my students. And it has some explanations of the different kinds of ways in which the enslaved became free. Sometimes it was through emancipation or abolition. Sometimes it was from the top down. That was the case in the British colonies like Barbados, Jamaica, St. Vincent, Grenada. It was, and by top down I mean it was legislated into existence by the authorities. And some of these emancipations were gradual. Remember that slavery was a very intense system, and it was a system that was always had the possibility of exploding. Remember what Jefferson, who was a slaver, once said, that slavery is like holding a tiger by the ears. You don't know what to do because you can't hold it forever, but you can't let the tiger go either. It's a very intense system that is always about to explode. Now, in this activity, students learn about the different ways of emancipation and the different forms of resistance. Forms of resistance. Some were armed, violent resistance. Maroons who escaped. The one on the right is a revolt, a slave revolt, I believe, in a slave ship like Amistad. By the way, I also want to bring to your attention the film Amistad by Spielberg. It came out around, I want to say, 25 years ago, and it's a wonderful film that can also be used in class. Just like another film that I like very much is the Amazing Grace those are materials that you can use in class. But there were other forms of resistance. Capoeira. I saw that some of the commenters talked about Brazil. Capoeira is a form of martial arts. Oh, Mark Herman, a wolf by the ears. Sorry, wrong animal on my part. It was a wolf. Sorry about that. And there's a film called Quilombo about the Maroon village in Brazil. Yes, marronage was very extensive throughout the Atlantic world. And I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, but in the United States, because it was such a police state during the antebellum, slaves could escape, and many did, but I have not come across instances of maroon communities that lasted for a long time in the United States. I may be wrong, but you do have them in places like Brazil and Jamaica, and these were very, very powerful military units that brought the planter class and the white elites to the table, negotiation table. That's how powerful they were. Another form of resistance the oral tradition. Oral tradition, as we all know, is very strong in the African American community. It was very strong, of course, during slavery as well. And this is an example of one of them. The coon and the dog. And let me just read it quickly. This is the type of stories that were told among slaves. Every time I think of slavery, and if it done the race any good, I think of the story of the coon and the dog who met. The coon said to the dog, "Why is it you are so fat and I am so poor, and we is both animals?" The dog said, "I lay round master's house and let him kick me, and he gives me a piece of bread right on." And then the response by the raccoon, "Better than that I stay poor." And this is the kind of wisdom, and what you see happening here is that through storytelling, through humor, and there's some collections of the jokes that slaves used, it's a way of inverting society. The structure would be, well, the master class is on top, the domestic slaves are next, they tend to have better living conditions, and then at the bottom we have the laboring field slaves. But what this does, it turns the world upside down. I have a collection of Cuban slave sayings, and one of them goes, "Todo corazón son colorado." And to translate it, it says, "All hearts are red." You see how they're trying to turn the world upside down, a world that brings the slaves and blacks to the bottom. They're trying to sort of invert that order. This is a song. I won't try to sing it, but what I'm going to try to do is find somebody who can do the music for me. But these are the kinds of slave songs that were used again as forms of Stacy Zavala. "I love that capoeira was fighting this guy says danced." That's of course true. And they were able to use instruments like sticks that they would use in the dances, but it was really masking training for revolts and uprisings. Okay. Syncretism and transculturation. This is a beautiful image. This is an ajiaco, which is the Cuban national dish. It is a representation of the coming together of the various cultural groups. What we have here are some of the original indigenous ingredients, like ají peppers and some tubers. And then we have the arrival of the Europeans. Well, the corn is also indigenous. The arrival of the Europeans, you can see some chicken there, onions, and then with the growth of the slave trade, we have other African foodstuffs, plantains that were brought to the New World from Africa and became key staples. And again, I think this is a beautiful metaphor for Cuban and Caribbean culture. And then lastly, Mike Williams made reference to this. This is the other side of the legacy of slavery. You exploit, you abuse, you inflict pain upon the working classes and the slaves. And this is at that place that we mentioned before, that plantation in Barbados. This was the desk or a chair, very comfortable chair for the master of that plantation. You see the book is there, everything is broad. They don't even have to move to eat or drink. They can't even hold their own book. They have a stand there. And that is the closing slide. I've really enjoyed this, and I've enjoyed reading your comments. Stacy Gaines, yes, yummy. If you go to Miami, get some ajiaco. It's wonderful. Again, I've really enjoyed this, and
thank you. Thank you so very much, Luis. We have a few questions that in our remaining time, I'd love to run by you. And we had a question from Justin earlier. And this is a question, particularly when you're looking at slavevoyages.org, or you're looking at the passages and disembarkation percentages throughout the years. But his question is Professor, why do we see such a major discrepancy in the total numbers between the Curtin Book and the Slave Voyages website between 1801 and 1870? I believe, if I recall, and I will scroll back up to your table, but there was a noticeable drop-off between the 1700s and the 1800s. And Justin wants to know why the discrepancy between 1801 and 1870. I believe it's a drop of 6 million down to about 1 million.
Yeah. Well, of course, the abolition of the slave trade, both in England and also in what had become the United States, 1808, right? So that explains the drop-off. What we see happening in places like Cuba is that the population drops, and actually, even though the slave trade had been banned, there's a lot of smuggling that happened.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you so much. Was slavery in other parts of the world similar to American chattel slavery, or is that different, more severe, or more inhumane, or is there a different, severe, more inhumane degree of slavery unique to the United States?
Thank you. I see so many comments of gratitude from my colleagues who teach, and I'm really touched by that. Slavery, there's been a debate over the decades of where slavery was harshest. And there have been some variables that have been explored. For example, if you were a slave in Cuba in tobacco, you were under better circumstances, materially speaking, than under sugar, because sugar production is grueling. Just the cutting of the cane, the rush to the mill, the heat, the fact that the sugar harvest, had to be done in a hurry, because once you cut the sugar cane, you have to transport it quickly and process it. For example, in North America, in the low country, rice production was not viewed as harsh as, say, cotton later in the 19th century. So that's one variable. Another variable has been, well, where, and there's a book that I included earlier that it's called, by Tannenbaum, A Slave and a Citizen. And that was a comparative study back from the 1940s, but very influential. And they said, well, there's a difference. In the North American colonies, slaves were materially better treated. That is, they had better food, better living conditions. That explains in part why that population was able to expand and reproduce itself. But he says that in the Spanish and Portuguese colonies, they were seen as citizens. Now, that may be too much to say, but that their humanity was recognized. And if we go back to those documents that I shared about marriage, how in the Spanish tradition, marriage was something that masters could not interfere with by law, whereas in the common law tradition, the masters could stop it, could separate those who were married. So those are some of the variables that have been looked at. Of course, slavery was horrible everywhere. The best indication of that is that slaves were always looking for opportunities to seek freedom, to seek spaces for themselves, to seek, and this is an important term, and that is to reconstitute peasantries. Slave populations, those who were brought from Africa, they were peasants. These were peasant societies in which they were not forced, in which they produced their own products at their own pace. Here in the New World, we see the plantation system. And whenever slaves were thrown into that plantation system, they did whatever they could to resist that. Sometimes they escaped, but sometimes they pressured the planters. Listen, we want to have our provisions grounds, our own plots of land where we can produce our own foodstuffs. So that's a fascinating aspect of slavery. When you're a slave, no matter what, you're going to seek your freedom.
Good deal. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. And again, thank you all for your question that you're entering into the chat. If you will, Luis, will you speak to perhaps differences in life expectancy for the enslaved while we were comparing the United States versus the Caribbean and Barbados and places? Can you speak to the life expectancy of enslaved people who were either born in these areas in the Caribbean and or who were imported to those areas versus the United States?
Yeah, some of the estimates are that in places like Cuba, at the peak of sugar production, where the conditions were so harsh, the lifetime was 7 years upon importation. I see a good friend of mine, Narciso Hidalgo. Hola, Narciso. And in other places, as in the United States, it was much longer. But there's another factor here that I need to explain a little bit, and that is, if you have a gender imbalance where you have very few females, say 10, 15%, and the balance males, that population is not likely to grow because you have very few females. Now, if you had a population where you had, say, 10% male and 90% female, which was not the case anywhere, then you have that female population that allows the population to reproduce. And what we find in North America was a balance. We don't find that kind of balance in other places where the slave trade continued and the preference was, let's bring male slaves who were preferred because the belief was that they could do harder work in the plantations.
Thank you so much for that. I appreciate that response. Yeah, another question we have is in what ways is the legacy of the enslaved African population still visible in, say, for instance, contemporary Cuban society? In slide 43, you made reference to the particular meal where you have like so many elements of the culture actually demonstrated within that particular recipe. But in what ways that the African population or the enslaved who were there, how are they visible today in contemporary society?
Yes, that's very true in most slave societies or former slave societies, I should say. Some of the areas where you see a lot of this have to do with religion. And the Spaniards converted the slaves. Actually, upon arrival in the slave ships, they would just throw some holy water at them, give them a Christian name, and assume that they were Christians. But what they were able to do through the process of syncretism was to retain their own religions and their own values, their own spiritual values, while pretending to be Catholics. So what they did was they masked West African deities with names of Christian, of Catholic saints and representations of the Virgin Mary. So the appearance was that they were venerating the Virgin Mary, but they were really venerating some African deities. We also see it very much in music, and it's fascinating how the roots of much of the music of the Caribbean is African derived. We see this great gift that we were given of the polyrhythm. Salsa music, for example, it's one instrument stacked over the next, You have the clave, which are the two sticks that set the rhythm, and then you have at a different rhythm the bongo drums, at a different rhythm the conga drums, at another rhythm, my favorite instrument, basically the only one that I know how to play, the cowbell. That's one very rich African heritage in our music. And also call and response, which is essential, right? You have the lead voice and then the chorus response to that. We also find that in food. Some of my favorite foods are derivatives from slavery. There's something that Cubans like to eat, which is called the tasajo, and tasajo is salted beef. And salted beef was the main dish for the slaves. It was imported, salted beef, also rice and plantains. So you put those three together, all of them are legacies from the era of slavery.
Well, thank you for that. And you referred to syncretism, and I overlooked the question that we had there. There was a question early on as to exactly what syncretism is. Can you give us a short version of syncretism? Yes, thank you.
Yeah, it's a fusion of different aspects. So when you look at, let's say, Puerto Rican food, for example, you have these ingredients and ways of cooking that are African derived. If there, I suppose that there's some Puerto Ricans here in the audience. Alcapurria, which is one of the great fritters in the Puerto Rican tradition. Well, alcapurria comes from if you look at an alcapurria, which is a fried, it is the Greek, the word escapes me, falafel. It's the same thing, but they did not have pigeon peas in places like Puerto Rico, but they used yuca and plantain. So it's the same principle, the same idea of a recipe, but it is syncretized, and it brings together one tradition and another tradition, and it produces something new.
All right. Well, everyone, I believe that is our time. Thank you so very much for joining us this evening, taking time out of your busy schedule. This was a 2-webinar a week, and so you all came back, and you continue to come back in droves. And so I can't say enough how much we appreciate you being here. And Dr. Luis Martinez-Fernandez, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to share your thoughts and to share your research and the impactful work that you've been doing in Central Florida and beyond. And I can't wait to sit down with you and to continue to explore these things, particularly our experiences in Barbados and West Africa and places like that. So again, my friend, thank you so very much for being here tonight.
Thank you, and thank you to all my colleagues from K-12.
Oh, yeah. Indeed. And to Luis's colleagues and friends down in Florida, thank you all for signing on tonight. Please consider joining us again. And to stay updated on all that's happening at the National Humanities Center, please follow us on our various social media channels, or you can log into nationalhumanitiescenter.org. I see someone there who said, we would love to have a part 2 to this. Thank you so much. We may have to discuss that and see if the option is available. We also encourage you to support the humanities education programs. The NHC education programs provide a bridge between the academic world and the working classroom. Your gift, no matter how modest, can open up a world of ideas for teachers and rekindle their enthusiasm for the subjects that they teach. By providing the knowledge and the tools that they and their students need to make a difference. Next up, we will be back with one of our fellows, one of our forever fellows, NHC Fellow 2425, Belle Boggs, with The Legend of Wyatt Outlaw. So Belle is going to be here on February the 19th at 7 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time. For those of you who have not signed up already, please consider to do so. You are in for a treat. So we are very much, again, looking forward to just seeing you and engaging with you all. You always just liven up the chat with your comments and your remarks and your interactions with our speakers. So again, take care, be well. Thank you for joining us. And if I can assist you in any way, please do not hesitate to reach out to me at mwilliams@nationalhumanitiescenter.org or nhc_ed@nationalhumanitiescenter.org. All right, everyone, enjoy your weekend.